6 December 1944, the Philippines. Since the day General Douglas MacArthur was forced to leave the Philippines, he has been determined to return. Now, having succeeded in doing so, landing at Leyte on 20 October, he intends to work his way up the archipelago, wresting island after island from the Japanese until he reaches and frees the capital city of Manila on the island of Luzon. Like crossing a country stream on stepping stones, MacArthur must reach each point in his plan before he can attempt the next one. And so, before he can return to Luzon, he must secure Mindoro and build enough airfields there to launch the bombers, fighters, and tactical reconnaissance flights needed to support an assault on the capital. In turn, before MacArthur can move against Mindoro, his troops must control Leyte. But the pieces of the general's plan are not falling into place. Japanese reinforcements on Leyte have thrown a wrench into his timetable. Now it will be longer than he had hoped before he can walk down the main street of Manila and savor the ultimate satisfaction of his return. MacArthur originally planned to be on Mindoro by 5 December and on Luzon by 20 December. Leyte changed all that when fighting there dragged on far longer than projected. The key to cracking the Japanese defense on Leyte is the port city of Ormoc, site of the main Japanese base on the island. Mac orders General Andrew Bruce's 77th Infantry to land near Ormoc, encircle the city from the north and south, and drive a wedge through the Japanese defenses. The Japanese send reinforcements toward Ormoc from other parts of the island, but U.S. Army Air Force and Marine planes repel them. Only 3 days after the initial assault, following advance firing by artillery, mortars, and rocket-firing landing craft, American tanks and infantry break through the Japanese defense into Ormoc itself. Bruce's infantry has divided the Japanese forces on Leyte. To complete the American invasion strategy, other U.S. units now begin moving northward to encircle and conquer the Emperor's troops. The impatient MacArthur, considering Leyte to be virtually in U.S. hands, checks it off his list. He looks now to Mindoro. Washington's top brass and many of MacArthur's own staff consider this premature assault on Mindoro risky at best. Although the island is lightly defended, it is well within the reach of Japanese aircraft based near Manila. MacArthur, however, has bet that General Tomoyuki Yamashita will let the Americans have Mindoro without a fight, conserving his strength for the inevitable struggle for Luzon. So far, MacArthur is winning that bet. On 15 December, GIs of the 24th Infantry Division go ashore unopposed. They disembark from their LSTs onto dry land and advance against light resistance. Mindoro, a mountainous, tropical island, really has little to offer the Allies except proximity to Luzon. It is here, near the southwestern city of San Jose and the Mangarin Bay, that they will build the airfields that will provide them access to their next objective, Lingayen Gulf. Right now, their main priority is to have in place by 20 December at least one airstrip capable of accommodating a fighter group. By the first week of the new year, however, they will need to have enough airfields in place to provide air support for the entire operation. MacArthur has rescheduled the Lingayen landing for 9 January. Having delayed it once, it's unlikely that he will postpone again his ultimate moment of triumph. 16 December 1944, Germany in the Pacific. Before this war, in its long-range aircraft, the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, and now the B-29 Superfortress, strategic bombing was merely a theory, a what-if, discussed around the table in military planning rooms. What if a bomber could fly deep into an enemy's territory, strike at the heart of his supplies operation, and demoralize his people? Would war end sooner? Would lives of men slogging through the trenches and across battlefields on the ground be saved? Today, those questions are being answered. As Allied ground troops slowly break the German soldiers' will to fight, the mighty bombers of the British and U.S. Air Forces pound the German homeland in an attempt to break Der Führer's capacity to fight. The Emperor of Japan and his people are faring no better. As American-made fire and death begin to rain from the skies on their home islands, many in the land of the rising sun are learning a new respect for the sleeping giant they so arrogantly awakened just 3 years ago. The Allies' strategic bombing campaign has delivered nearly 200,000 tons of deadly payload on communication, transportation, and industrial centers across Germany, dealing blow after deadly blow to Hitler's war-making capacity. But the Allied air forces aren't placing all of their explosive eggs in one strategic basket. As the men of the 1st and 3rd Armies push tenaciously to Germany, B-26 Marauders of the U.S. 9th Air Force provide tactical support for their efforts. In a matter of days, the U.S. 9th Air Force alone flies 1,300 combat sorties and drops 2,500 tons of bombs on Germany's bridges, highway junctions, rail yards, gun positions, supply dumps, and airfields. Meanwhile, the Allied bombing campaign in the Pacific is just beginning to gather steam. Bases in the Marianas Islands, only 1,500 miles from the Japanese homeland, are proving much more convenient to targets. Even in the Marianas, however, they face obstacles. The pilots' training is limited. They are unfamiliar with operating in the jet stream, where winds routinely exceed 100 knots, and the 21st has no better weather forecast facilities than the 20th. It's not surprising, then, that the B-29's efforts have met with limited success so far. But with closer proximity to Japan and time, the odds are turning in their favor. On 31 October, a B-29 of the 21st flew a high-altitude reconnaissance mission over Tokyo. It was the first flight from Tinian in the Marianas Islands, and its success buoyed the U.S. fighting spirit. In the weeks that followed, the 21st practiced for a high-altitude bombing attack on Tokyo using Iwo Jima as its target. Finally, on 24 November, 111 superforts took to the sky for the mass raid on the Masashima Aircraft Works in the Japanese capital. The results were disappointing, as more than half of the mighty bombers missed their mark. When they tried again 3 days later, the outcome wasn't any better. On both occasions, they couldn't overcome bad weather, and they still hadn't learned to compensate for the high winds of the jet stream. Still, they persist. In addition to Tokyo, the U.S. Air Forces have made assaults on strategic transportation and industrial targets in Bangkok and Omura, and are preparing for raids on Japanese bases in China. While the superfortress hasn't proven to be a great success yet, with forward bases in the Marianas and the fact that they are virtually impervious to Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire, it is likely that their effectiveness will increase. Their efforts thus far have sent Japanese citizens scrambling for cover. Each time a B-29 successfully strikes the Japanese homeland, it reminds the enemy just how vulnerable he now is to Allied attack. The despair of the Japanese people can only deepen as death continues to rain from the skies, and the superfortress gets ever nearer to fulfilling its promise of ultimate defeat. 16 December 1944, Belgium. American soldiers resting in the wintry calm of the Ardennes are abruptly awakened this morning by mortars, rockets, and artillery fire. Thousands of pinpoints of light illuminate the splintering trees and heaving ground as the stunned GIs hunker down in their foxholes. None of these dogfaces believed the Nazis could, or would, mount an assault of such fury here at the end of the war. Along an 85-mile front from Echternach in the south to Monschau in the north, the roar of German tank engines and the scream of artillery echo through the bitter cold of the forest. In many cases, soldiers find themselves alone and isolated as the shadowy forms of German infantrymen thrash by them on their way west. But this offensive is the brainchild of Adolf Hitler himself, who cannot conceive of an Allied victory over his army of Aryan Superman. Formulated shortly after the failed attempt on his life in July, the Führer's plan hinged on launching the attack in early December, when the foul weather would ground British and American planes and nullify Allied air supremacy. The main objective of the Führer's surprise offensive is Antwerp, and he has devised a precise timetable for its capture. If the Wehrmacht can retake the crucial port city, they will drive a wedge between the Americans in the south and the British in the north. Though his generals felt that the plan was madness, the Führer's will won the day. The bewildered generals retreated from Hitler's fantasy world to the real world, where they have tried to make something of his plan. Field Marshals Gerd von Rundstedt and Wilhelm Mödel were assigned the task of implementing the offensive. Under the strictest of secrecy, they assembled all available German reserves into a formidable fighting force of more than 200,000 men. General Sepp Dietrich, or Staunch Old Dietrich, as Hitler calls him, leads his 6th SS Panzer Army in the northern flank of the assault. The diminutive General Hasso von Manteuffel commands the 5th Panzer Army, attacking in the center along the same routes covered in 1940. In the south, General Erich Brandenberger's 7th Army protects Manteuffel's flank as they race for the Meuse. The German troops drive headlong into battle with Rundstedt's last exhortation echoing in their ears: "We gamble everything." Allied intelligence is just as confused by the assault as the GIs in the foxholes. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or SHAEF, had thought the Germans were beaten and that they would spend the winter stalling for time to rebuild the armies shattered by the Allies in the fall campaigns. SHAEF assumed the Germans would try to make their last stand in the spring amongst the deadly entanglements of the West Wall. As the American lines crumble, Eisenhower, sporting a newly conferred 5th star, and fresh from his orderly's wedding, meets with General Omar Bradley in Versailles to discuss the implications of the attack. Bradley suggests it might be a spoiling attack, designed to weaken American morale by ruining their Christmas. The men in the lines had, after all, come to believe the war would be over by then. The Supreme Commander fears it is more. He has a gut feeling that something big is up. He immediately orders the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into the line, hoping they will stem the tide of the offensive by bringing relief to the besieged units in the forest. This is of little comfort to the men of Major General Walter E. Lauer's 99th Infantry Division, recently arrived from the States. These green men find themselves facing the brunt of Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army. In the cold, isolated village of Lanzerat, a small and badly outnumbered company of GIs from the 99th holds off repeated vicious Nazi assaults. The bone-weary foot soldiers watch in horror as their tank support flees to the rear. One GI notes wryly, "They might at least wave goodbye." The main body of the 99th, fighting along Elsenborn Ridge, gets unexpected help when the 2nd Infantry Division retreats through their lines. The unit had been conducting an attack to the north when 5th Corps Commander General Leonard T. Jarrow, surprised by the offensive, pulled them back to help the 99th at Elsenborn. In a daring series of fighting withdrawals, the veteran infantrymen of the 2nd assumed defensive positions alongside the 99th. Once his unit is in position, the commander of the 2nd, Major General Walter Robertson, assumes command of both units. With the firs of the Elsenborn for cover, and with liberal artillery support, the soldiers manage to dig in. Now, they wait to see what fate and the Führer have in store. Another inexperienced unit that has just set foot on the continent is Major General Allen W. Jones' 106th Infantry Division. Receiving a bloody baptism of artillery fire from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, the terror-stricken unit becomes confused and disorganized in the fog. Stationed farthest east of any Allied unit amidst the pines of the Schnee-Eifel, the Hardlock 106th receives contradictory orders throughout 17 and 18 December. Men, trudging back and forth through the dark forests again and again, find themselves fighting pitched battles with small German units. The 7th Armored Division, hurrying to aid the 106th in their defense of the strategic village of Saint-Vite, is delayed and disrupted by American troops fleeing to the rear. The tankers finally reach the contested village, but they are too late. In the biggest mass surrender of Americans since Bataan, almost 9,000 men of the 106th have been surrounded by the Germans and marched into captivity. Hardest hit of all are the men of Major General Norman Coda's 28th Infantry Division, who already were known as the Bloody Bucket Division because of the grievous casualties they took in the grim battle for the Hürtgen Forest. Panicked soldiers flee to the rear in short order. Commanders watch in horror as whole units are wiped out or put to rout. Unbeknownst to the officers, small pockets of GIs remain at the front and buy time for their retreating brothers by fighting valiantly from positions in the rubble of houses and hotels in small towns like Clairvaux and Wiltz. As evening descends upon the Ardennes on 20 December, German soldiers have made massive gains in what appears to be a great victory. But their commanders are careful not to take too much satisfaction in their work just yet. Manteuffel in particular realizes pockets of American resistance have disrupted the timetable so crucial to the Führer's plans. Unless these men can be eliminated, the whole offensive is in danger of failure. Among his concerns is the inevitable reaction of the Allies to atrocities committed by the SS during the fighting. More than 90 civilians have been gunned down in the tiny village of Stavlo by troops of the 1st SS Division. To make matters worse, there are reports of American prisoners of war being executed near Malmedy. Within hours, word is spread through the German and American commands that stormtroopers have summarily executed 86 of 125 GIs who surrendered in the tiny Belgian village. All along the front, German soldiers pick through the spoils of war, finding time for a smoke or a chocolate bar. But as the weather grows harsher, snow and fog settle over the forest, American soldiers find their hearts filling with unspeakable anger. In their foxholes, cold, exhausted, and bitter with the desire for revenge, the GIs sit. They know now there will be no peace by Christmas. With thoughts of home filling their hearts, they know now they must fight on this foreign ground for yet a few more weeks. Perhaps next Christmas. "25 December 1944, Europe, even amidst the worst carnage in human history. The men fighting this war take a moment today to reflect on happier, more peaceful times. For the rookie on the front lines, the cold, lonely foxhole is a world away from Christmas a year ago. Then, the war was in the newspapers and on the radio, an affair far distant from home, family, or sweetheart. For the veteran GI, this day's reflection elicits memories of that first Christmas in North Africa, where seas of sand and blistering heat were a poor substitute for fields of snow and winter's icy bite. Still, there were the friends that you shared that Christmas with. Many of them would stay in North Africa forever. Some of them would celebrate Christmas 1943, slogging up the boot in Italy, while your unit was sent to England training for the big cross-channel jump. Yeah, you thought about those boys while you shared the holiday spirit and comforts of home with an English family. You wonder how many of them are still around celebrating this Christmas. You wonder about the Germans you're facing here in the Ardennes. This Christmas doesn't seem to matter to them as they try to push you all the way back to Normandy, yet you hear the strains of Stille Nacht coming from their side of the lines. They're probably doing the same thing you are, remembering better Christmas past, better times. In a few hours, or a few minutes, you'll be back at the grim business of trying to win a war. But for now, you allow the spirit of the moment to form an invisible bond with those plaintive voices in the woods. You think about your brother in the Pacific. Boy, what you wouldn't do to be with him right now. Oh well. This cup of Christmas cheer that somebody passes off for coffee will have to do. And Merry Christmas, 1944. 9 January 1945, Lingayen Gulf, Luzon. General Douglas MacArthur's plan for the conquest of the Philippines archipelago was opposed by some Washington strategists and by President Roosevelt himself, who thought the logical next step from Leyte was Formosa. But the general won a heated debate on the subject by promising to take all the Philippine Islands on a timetable far more optimistic than any proposed for the capture of Formosa. Now, with mopping up action still underway on Leyte, MacArthur already is 3 weeks behind. He is more than ready to begin his assault on Luzon. MacArthur's invasion point is a secret to no one. The inviting and strategically sound horseshoe-shaped beach at the Lingayen Gulf, halfway up Luzon's western coast, is the same place the Japanese occupiers landed in 1941. In order to assure air superiority for the Luzon invasion, the Allies took Mindoro Island just south of Luzon on 15 December. By 23 December, Australian and American air crews had built the complex of runways needed, a full week ahead of schedule. On 4 January, en route to soften up the landing beaches at Lingayen, Vice Admiral Jesse Ohlendorf's battle fleet was introduced to a novel and deadly Japanese weapon, the kamikaze. The one-man fighters appeared in successive waves, vying for the opportunity to plunge directly into Allied warships, happily trading their lives for emperor and honor. American fighters, taking off from carriers and from the new airstrips at Mindoro, set up a tight curtain of air defense around Ohlendorf's ships. Though the majority of the suicide planes were ravaged in a blanket of American fire, some managed to slip through. And in the new world of the kamikaze, some were more than enough. As Ohlendorf's fleet moved to within 150 miles of Lingayen, they entered the range of Japanese fighters based on Luzon, and the kamikazes increased in number. On 6 January, the ships entered Lingayen Gulf, and the kamikaze attacks heightened to hysteric levels. Bad luck haunted the Americans as a thick, overcast sky grounded most of their flying force. To the suicide dive bombers already set on death, the clouds, by masking their approach, merely improved their chances for success. 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 3 destroyers were among the American casualties. All told, the kamikaze damaged or sank 30 Allied vessels. The new Japanese threat had proven itself an issue that the Americans must address. And with the rising of the sun on 7 January, address it they did. Under clear skies, American fighters attacked and obliterated the Japanese airfields on Luzon, effectively putting an end to the kamikaze threat in the Philippines. With air superiority secured, the Americans began bombarding the beaches at Lingayen Gulf, intent on softening up the heavy resistance they expected to meet when they finally went ashore. At 9:30 a.m. on 9 January, the first of 200,000 men of Kruger's 6th Army start their landing, without opposition. All dressed up and ready to fight, the Americans find themselves stood up at Lingayen Gulf. Not a single Japanese defender is in sight. The no-show is part of Japanese General Yamashita's defensive scheme. His 250,000-man army is imposing, but it is not nearly large enough to deny the Americans a beachhead or even to defend all of Luzon. With the bulk of the Empire's fleet sunk at Leyte, Yamashita understands that he will not be getting reinforcements. Nevertheless, he plans to fight a long and stubborn defense that will drain the Allied army. Accordingly, Yamashita breaks his forces into 3 separate groups and positions them defensively in a complex network of entrenchments in the mountains surrounding Lingayen Gulf. Each of the 3 groups, the Shobo, Kembu, and Shimbu, is responsible for a specific area and its tactical sites. The Shobo group, the largest of the 3, is under Yamashita's personal command in North Luzon. With a 17-mile beachhead intact, one corps begins its mission of seizing a crucial roadway junction in order to protect the flank of 14 Corps as it moves south toward Clark Air Base in Manila. When Yamashita's well-dug-in Shobo group stops one corps' advance and prevents them getting into position to support the 14th, MacArthur instructs Kruger to move on to Manila anyway. Opposition is non-existent until 23 January, when the Americans run full speed into the determined Kembu group guarding Clark Air Base. Unlike their kamikaze brothers, these Japanese defenders have been content to let the Americans come to them. They know the Americans must have Clark if they are to control the Philippines, and they are prepared to make them pay for it. 19 December 1944, Belgium. Along a crumbling front in the Belgian Ardennes, U.S. soldiers are engaged in desperate combat against their suddenly resurgent German foes. Nazi panzer grenadiers, flush with victory, have advanced out of the snow, attacking and overpowering unprepared and disorganized American units. U.S. commanders, lost in the fog of unexpected battle, have ordered retreats on a massive scale as the Germans press forward, creating a bulge in the Allied lines. But small pockets of stubborn U.S. resistance have cost the German juggernaut precious time. In Europe and back home, newspapers already have coined the phrase Battle of the Bulge. As news of the German victories and German atrocities grows, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower attempts to regain control over the situation. He splits General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group. General George S. Patton's 3rd Army in the South will remain directly under Bradley's control. In the North, Lieutenant General Courtney H. Hodges' 1st Army and Lieutenant General William H. Simpson's 9th Army are given to none other than milquetoast British Commander Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The command change has an immediate payoff, as Montgomery commits the British 30 Corps to back up U.S. tank units deployed along the Meuse River. Should the Germans attempt to breach the river, they will be in for a tough fight. On the other hand, Montgomery's cautious approach and the inept manner in which he deals with his subordinates immediately irritates the Americans whom he commands. The American sensibilities are rankled by Monty's absolute conviction that his arrival in command will save the day. For the moment, Eisenhower has more important problems to deal with. Through a fluke, one of the many that will affect the outcome of this battle, Eisenhower's reserve unit, the 101st Airborne Division, accidentally finds itself alone and cut off in the strategic hamlet of Bastogne. To make matters worse, the 101st's commander and executive commander are on leave. It will fall to the division's artillery commander, Brigadier General Anthony C. McAuliffe, to lead the division into battle against a force 3 times its size. Bastogne is like the hub of a wheel, where 6 important roads intersect like spokes, and German units are closing in from all sides. McAuliffe decides to make a stand. His men, a hodgepodge of units including some elements of the 10th Armored Division, have made the 100-mile journey from Mourmelon-le-Grand, France, in open trucks. Nevertheless, he sends them immediately into the dark woods surrounding Bastogne. Reports reach McAuliffe of grisly clashes at Neuville, Magrez, and Marville. German panzer tanks are pressing forward with deadly malice. Like tigers in the snow, they hunt the paratroopers, intent on devouring them. With each passing hour, it is clearer that the situation is desperate for the Americans. Still, all attempts by German forces to enter Bastogne itself are repulsed by the veteran GIs. On 20 December, the embattled Americans are completely encircled and vastly outnumbered by German forces. As the battle to take the town escalates, supplies run low for the 101st, and the weather continues to worsen. Allied planes, still grounded by heavy fog, can do nothing to bring relief to Bastogne. Casualties mount. Clerks, cooks, and service troops find themselves pressed into frontline service. As one of McAuliffe's aides puts it, the 101st is the hole in the donut. Still, the Americans in the besieged city refuse to give up, and even as they struggle for survival, a plan is hatched at General Eisenhower's headquarters. General Patton tells Eisenhower he will drive to Bastogne and relieve the 101st. Many on Ike's staff scoff at the idea that Patton can halt his Third Army in the midst of a major winter offensive, swing north, then resupply without rest, and, in frigid weather, march to the relief of the encircled defenders. Patton knows the situation in Bastogne is desperate, and he knows his soldiers will come through. Before attending the meeting with Ike, Patton already has ordered his staff to implement the plan. On 22 December, Patton's terrible swift sword swings northward toward Bastogne and the relief of McAuliffe. It will be days before Patton can reach the paratroopers, if he can reach them at all. But with defeat seemingly inevitable, the battered bastards of Bastogne awaken on 23 December to the drone of C-47 engines. The weather is cleared, and supplies rain down on the trapped men like manna from heaven. P-47 Thunderbolt fighters hammer at German positions. Like sheep, the unprotected tanks and vehicles of the panzer divisions are lined up for the slaughter on the open roads leading into Bastogne. Fortified and resupplied, the Yanks in the encircled city suddenly find new hope. The Nazi forces continue to advance with Teutonic tenacity, but the boys in Bastogne fight back stubbornly. Both sides are aware that Patton's army will break through soon. The now panicked Germans send wave after wave of grenadiers in white snow gear against the dug-in paratroopers. On Christmas Day, the Nazis try one last major assault. When the American paratroopers begin falling back, Bayerlein believes his victory is at hand. Patton will come too late. But the retreat of the 101st is a clever ruse by McAuliffe. The crafty Yanks have lured the Germans into a trap. As the Panzer-Lehr troops and tanks pursue the fleeing paratroopers, U.S. tank destroyers burst forward from their hiding places in the woods and blast the stunned attackers. Their assault capabilities spent, the Germans change tactics. They send an ultimatum demanding surrender of the town. McAuliffe replies simply, "Nuts." Enraged, the Germans loose a hellish barrage of artillery on Bastogne. Shells of all types rained down upon the exposed city, setting fires, leveling houses, and killing scores of American soldiers and Belgian civilians. Still, the paratroopers grimly hold on. Upon hearing the news of McAuliffe's reply, Patton redoubles his efforts to relieve the city. "Drive like hell," he orders his men. While the men of the 101st pass an uneasy Christmas, Patton's 4th Armored Division pushes forward in bitter conditions. On 26 December, their lead tanks blast through a lone pillbox near the town of Ardennes. Relief has come at last to Bastogne. In short order, McAuliffe radios, "We're in fine shape. We're ready to take the offensive." The jubilation is short-lived. While Patton's men inflict heavy losses on the Germans in short order, the surviving Nazi units still have plenty of fight left. At Allied headquarters, it is becoming evident that, while the battle is far from over, it is not lost. With the victory at Bastogne and the efforts of American units in the northern and southern flanks, the tide of Hitler's offensive is turning. At Nazi headquarters, too, it is becoming apparent that the offensive is in trouble. Bastogne has become an abscess in their lines, and its very name rings bitter in their ears. December 1944, Leyte. Although General Douglas MacArthur declared the island of Leyte to be under U.S. control on 10 December, someone evidently forgot to tell the Japanese. Fighting to the bitter end, they have continued to mount bloody and brutal counterattacks against U.S. forces on the island. The Americans who have repelled most of these advances, the tired and battered troops of General Walter Kruger's 6th Army, now are looking forward to a little rest and relaxation. Their commander will join MacArthur to plan for the coming invasion of Japan, and Lieutenant General Robert Eichelberger's 8th Army will finish whatever mopping up remains to be done on Leyte. On the surface, Leyte hardly seems to have been worth the price Americans have paid for it. Seasonal monsoon rains deluged the island shortly after the GIs arrived, making its airfields useless. Engineers are still behind schedule in the construction of new ones. But though MacArthur's strategic plan for Leyte isn't panning out, the U.S. has made other gains that he could not have foreseen. Leyte has been especially costly for the Japanese. In the days since the first U.S. soldiers set foot on the beaches near Tacloban and Dulag, the Japanese have suffered nearly 70,000 casualties. Fewer than 500 have opted to suffer the ultimate disgrace of surrendering. U.S. casualties, on the other hand, number approximately 15,000. But the Japanese have paid another, even higher price to make their stand at Leyte. On Leyte and in the waters surrounding it, the Japanese have met their Waterloo. The great Japanese naval and air fleets no longer exist. With these assets decimated, Japan, in effect, has no long-range offensive power with which to defend the remaining islands in the Philippines. Indeed, the home islands, already open to aerial attacks by US B-29 since June, are even more vulnerable without the Emperor's Navy to protect them. The Rising Sun's remaining strength lies primarily in a finite number of the dreaded and lethal kamikaze pilots, but it remains to be seen if they alone will be able to affect the ultimate outcome of the war. Having fought and won at Leyte, MacArthur already has turned his attention to the liberation of Luzon and the rest of the Philippines. Whether to invade Luzon at all was vehemently argued among the American High Command. Some Washington strategists, including President Roosevelt, believed that once Leyte was taken, the Americans, with a foothold in the Philippines, would be able to use the base to go straight for Formosa, one step closer to Tokyo. In a meeting with the President and other commanders, MacArthur violently disagreed. He could not accept leaving any of the Philippines, which he abandoned in 1942, under Japanese control. The general won the argument when he boldly claimed he could assault Luzon months ahead of the proposed timetable for taking Formosa. But now, The general is weeks behind his scheduled landing date at Lingayen. The Japanese defenses on Leyte reflected the island's importance to the Imperial Command, and no one, not even MacArthur, could have foreseen the terrible price the Japanese were willing to pay to keep it. January 12, 1945, Eastern Front. From the Baltic to the Balkans, the juggernaut that is the Soviet Red Army has steamrolled the once vaunted Wehrmacht. Though the Russians have suffered horrendous casualties at the hands of the Germans, they have been replaced almost immediately from a seemingly inexhaustible supply of manpower. Germany's eastern allies, Finland, Romania, and Bulgaria, also had fought the good fight against the Bolsheviks. Now each has been forced to sue for peace. The Baltic states have been recaptured and the Ukraine liberated. The Soviet Union has inflicted on the German army the worst defeat in its history. The Russian war machine has rested for 5 months, its armies drawn up to the Vistula River. In that time, the Red Army has consolidated its gains, reorganized and stockpiled resources in preparation for its next objective, the Oder River. Now the Soviet offensive finally explodes as 2 army groups push west, followed by a third 2 days later. The 3 outmanned German army groups attempting to stem the tide are no match. Red Army officers, having learned the art of blitzkrieg the hard way, now prove to their teachers they are not only apt students, but skilled practitioners. Even the designated fortress cities created to act as breakwaters against the red tide are enveloped and reduced without slowing the Soviet momentum. Nazi leadership finds it can do nothing to harden its citizens and soldiers to the deadly and terrifying specter of Soviet lead and steel. Appeals to patriotism, threats, even summary executions fail to stiffen German resistance. Additionally, critical fuel shortages hobble the German army, making its soldiers little more than sitting ducks. Der Führer's disastrous policy of not one step back is once again enforced, and his armies repeatedly are denied opportunities to retreat to defensible terrain. Hitler's fanatical delusion that the will of the individual German can overcome any military deficiency has rung the death knell for the Third Reich. For many Russian soldiers, this drive across Poland is sweet revenge for years of humiliation. From the brink of defeat, hundreds of miles deep in their homeland, they have endured and rebounded. In liberating their country, they have forced their Nazi occupiers to atone for the horrors they perpetrated on villages, homes, and loved ones. The rage that has burned in the Russian belly now gives rise to Russian savagery. Before the Red Army reaches the Oder, its soldiers will breathe the sweet smoke of German homes ablaze and hear the music of German cries for mercy. Revenge is a vintage that has long been fermenting in the Soviet Union, and now many in the Red Army will drink deep. 6 January 1945, Belgium. As the Battle of the Bulge wears on and the Allies struggle to regain control of the war, Adolf Hitler continues to demonstrate that, although he is mad, he is too clever to be written off yet. Throughout the European theater of operations, American soldiers are on the alert for Germans disguised as GIs. They are forced to take strong and sometimes elaborate measures to foil attempts at penetration of their lines. Der Fuhrer, attempting to gain a psychological advantage over his enemies, has ordered the creation of a special commando unit led by SS Lieutenant Colonel Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny has been tagged by the Allies as the most dangerous man in Europe because of his daring rescue of Benito Mussolini from a mountaintop in Italy. Skorzeny's Special Panzer Brigade, dressed in captured American uniforms and equipped with American tanks and vehicles, is under orders to penetrate the Allied lines and seize strategic bridges along the Meuse River. Unfortunately for Skorzeny, his brigade is bedeviled from the outset. While his troops may speak English, many have not mastered American slang and they have trouble passing. Worse, their captured American equipment is in poor shape. Unable to accomplish even the first phase of his mission, Skorzeny wisely gives up and commits the bulk of his 2,000-man unit to the support of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Not so his 4-man Jeep teams. 30 of these teams set out to infiltrate and wreak havoc behind U.S. lines. Armed principally with daring and guile, 9 managed to obtain their objectives of switching signs, blocking roads, and causing the diversion of American units. One group, when captured, causes even greater disruption to American military operations by confessing a fantastic and completely fabricated plot to assassinate Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower suddenly finds himself a virtual prisoner in his own headquarters. His security forces take extreme measures to protect him from the non-existent danger. At the front, crafty GIs, alerted to the presence of the German infiltrators, devise their own ingenious security procedures. They quiz suspicious GIs on aspects of life at home only a true American would know about. Where is Lil Abner's hometown? Who won the pennant this year? Even General Omar Bradley comes under scrutiny. The 12th Army Group commander is repeatedly halted by zealous MPs. Ultimately, most of the Nazi commando teams are run to ground. They receive proper, if quick, trials, and most are shortly executed as spies. In the northern salient of the Bulge, the fight takes on grim overtones around the village of Saint-Vite. The 7th Armored Division, still without winter gear, fights desperately to hold the strategic town. Despite their efforts, the Germans slowly gain the upper hand. Finally, after the battle has deteriorated to the terror of house-to-house and sometimes hand-to-hand combat, the 7th Commanding General, Robert Hasbrouck, is ordered to withdraw. But even retreat proves difficult as the division's tanks become mired in the muddy roads leading out of town. After an anxious day, Mother Nature takes the GI's part. Plummeting temperatures freeze and harden the muck enough for the armored Frigidaires to escape. In a flurry of automatic weapons fire and supported by tanks of their own, German soldiers charge into the village behind the fleeing Americans. Even in retreat, the dogfaces make the Nazis pay for their victory. Valiant rearguard troops in armored cars manage to destroy several Tiger tanks, even with the German infantry snapping at their heels. In the dark woods around Dambutkenbach and Monschau, Brigadier General Clift Andrus' 1st Infantry Division hunts down and dispatches a group of holdouts from an elite German paratroop unit which had surrendered on 23 December after a botched assault on the village of Malmedy. Having recovered from the initial shock of the German offensive, the Americans slowly regroup. At the hamlet of Baraque de Fretieux, the 3rd Armored Division and the 82nd Airborne Division meet the 2nd SS Panzer Division in bloody toe-to-toe combat. The fanatical Germans attack the 82nd again and again along a difficult-to-defend 15-mile front. General James Gavin's calls for support are at last answered by the 7th Armored Division, fresh from the battle at Saint-Vite, and by the 9th Armored Division. Still, the battle rages until Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who has been given command of the American troops in the north by Ike, personally orders a withdrawal to tidy up the battlefield. Gavin is loath to pull his men back, so he orders a fighting retreat. Soon, however, the men of Gavin's command are again on the offensive. Within days, the Americans have consolidated the front line and are able to send troops to help contain the German push to the south. The bitterest fighting centers on the castle itself, only a few miles from the Meuse River. Major General Ernest Harmon, commanding general of the 2nd Armored Division, has marched his unit more than 70 miles from the Aachen area to help stem the German advance. Within minutes of receiving reports that the 2nd Panzer Division is pressing forward, he asks for and receives permission to attack. The Americans rout their enemy in short order. As its fuel supplies begin to run out, the Panzer Division is unable to use its tanks effectively. The Americans watch jubilantly as the Germans abandon their armor and begin retreating on foot. In the south, General George S. Patton's Third Army, fresh from its triumph at Bastogne, pushes resolutely northward. After fighting bitterly for the woods above Bastogne, Patton's men are able to link up with the First Army near Uffalise on 16 January. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, having consulted with his senior staff, asks Hitler for permission to withdraw from the Bastogne area. Der Führer at first angrily refuses. Hitler already has accepted that his Wehrmacht will not be able to reach Antwerp. Perhaps thinking of a negotiated peace with the Allies, he advises his generals, above all, we must have Bastogne. But as he learns that the American 6th Armored, 26th Infantry, and 87th Infantry divisions are pressing westward to bolster American defenses in that city, he is forced to accept that it, too, has slipped from his grasp. With casualties mounting to horrific levels, the bully of the beer halls is forced to accept grim reality. Hitler decides his all-or-nothing offensive is over and turns his attention to the Russian front. Leaving his hapless generals in the Ardennes with no chance for triumph, he packs up his forward headquarters and, on 17 January, journeys back to Berlin, a bitter and broken man. 21 January 1945, Luzon. On the road to Manila, General Walter Kruger's 6th Army is driven by desire to atone for the American abandonment of Clark Field, which all but emasculated Allied Army and Navy power in the Philippines more than 3 years ago. As the largest air base in the Southern Pacific, and the only one capable of accommodating heavy bombers, Clark Field is key to the defenses of the Philippine Islands. Comprising more than a dozen runways and a battery of dispersal areas and associated installations, the Clark Field area extends for almost 15 miles. In desperate need of forward air support near Lingayen Gulf, Kruger orders Lieutenant General Oscar Griswold to move elements of his 14th Corps south to seize the airfield. Kruger's plan is to secure terrain north and west of Clark, then tighten the noose. Anticipating the Allied invasion, Japanese 14th Air Army Commander General Tomoyuki Yamashita places his Kembo Group in the mountainous country west of Clark. Even if he cannot hold the airfield, he intends to deny the Allies the use of it for as long as possible. Kembo Group numbers some 30,000 troops. The high ground it holds, along with an enormous supply of automatic weapons, gives it some advantage over the Americans. But the troops are green and inadequately trained. They are dug in with only rudimentary defenses and no heavy arms. Yamashita knows his hold is tenuous at best. Still, Kruger's men meet stiffening opposition as they near Clark. Japanese troops attack in numbers with small arms on the night of 21-22 January at La Paz. They materialize out of the night so suddenly and with such fury that the American response is at first weak and disorganized. As dawn approaches, the GIs find their bearings and begin beating back their attackers. On 23 January, the U.S. 160th Division secures the bomb-bound section of the base. As the Americans begin rooting out Japanese soldiers in the adjacent village, they come under increasingly heavy small arms fire from the low ridges of the nearby Zambales Mountains and from the banks of the Bamban River. Casualties mount as the GIs work to clear out the diehards, but by 25 January, they have solidified their position. Meanwhile, the 40th Division broadens its front to both the north and the south, and slowly begins to clear the hills on the edge of Clark Field. Skirmishing costs the Americans few casualties, but the Kembo Group loses over 300 men. It takes until 27 January, but Japanese resistance is finally driven back and U.S. troops push on toward the center of Clark. Late on 28 January, U.S. forces finally control runway number 1. Elated, but nonetheless surprised by their quick success, Griswold and Kruger order elements of the 6th to press on toward Manila as quickly as possible. Kruger's main concern, however, is to drive the Japanese further back into the mountains, away from Clark. He wants to ensure the safety of the Allied engineers as they carry out much-needed construction at the airfield. For the moment, Yamashita remains in position to harass Clark from more than 30 fortified caves, each of which must be cleared out by American teams of flamethrowers and infantrymen before the full advance to Manila can continue. Griswold dispatches the 37th Infantry Division to carry out this grim task. Sweeping through the western portion of the field on 30 January, the 37th runs into trouble. Rather than facing isolated groups of Japanese holed up in caves, they find themselves in a fiery tangle of destroyed hangars and minefields. Progress grinds to a halt as engineers work feverishly to clear the way. In addition to throwing off Griswold's timetable, the mines take a terrible emotional toll on the men. Every stride is a step into the unknown, possibly into eternity. The assault must continue, however. The total seizure of Clark Field and its outposts hinges upon control of a large, bare-sloped hill called Top of the World because of its commanding view of the base. Delayed and pinned down by Japanese fire, the Americans are reduced to advancing at a crawl, sometimes close enough to meet the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Nevertheless, they secure the steep, grassy southern and southeastern slopes of the hill on 31 January. Finally, on the afternoon of 1st February, Clark Field is secure. More than 150 Americans have been killed in the taking of Clark Field, but the Japanese have cornered the market on casualties, losing more than 2,500 men. Renovations are beginning on the wreckage at Clark, and the flow of supplies down Route 3 and the Manila Railroad, along which future advances toward the capital can be supported, are unbroken once again. But if the recapture of the Philippines by Allied forces is inevitable, someone has forgotten to tell the Japanese, and they will make the Americans pay a heavy toll in lives before they are through. January 1945, Warsaw. Elements of the Soviet Red Army explode out of their Vistula River bridgeheads, and all eyes in this war-torn city look expectantly, if not a little apprehensively, toward their long-promised salvation. What form that salvation will take is the question weighing most heavily on the minds of the Poles. Although Stalin has presented his Red Army as liberators, he makes it clear to the other Allied nations that a restoration of Poland's pre-war eastern frontier is out of the question. To legitimize his claims, he forms the Polish National Committee in Lublin and recognizes it as the legal Polish government. Although the National Committee is operating on Polish soil, it is clearly Stalin's puppet. The Red Army supplies its muscle. In one fell swoop, the Polish government in exile located in London has been disenfranchised. It remains to be seen if the continued recognition of the London Poles by the Western powers will have any effect on Stalin's plans. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Byelorussian Front now rips through the German defenses north and south of Warsaw. Although the foggy weather slows the Russian attackers somewhat, the sheer weight of men and materiel, coupled with the paucity of German defenders, makes the Red Army's advance irresistible. The German Ninth Army, guarding the city's approaches, in short order is split in two by Zhukov's forces. Once again, the vaunted German army, which has been magnificent when allowed to exercise the mobile doctrine it perfected, is reduced to a ripe for the plucking static force by order of the increasingly paranoid Führer. The 4 incomplete battalions and few artillery batteries that constitute the garrison of Warsaw seek and receive permission from the German Army High Command to abandon the ruins of the city. They retreat to avoid encirclement. This common-sense maneuver drives Hitler into a state of apoplexy. Chief of the German General Staff, Colonel General Heinz Guderian, and 3 officers of his operations staff are subsequently detained and forced to explain their abandonment of Warsaw to the Gestapo. Now, long-suffering Warsaw is liberated. Along with units of the 1st Belarusian Army, units of General Sigmund Berling's 1st Polish Army enter the city. Warsaw, the first European capital to fall to Nazi aggression, becomes the last to be liberated. Next stop for the Soviet juggernaut, Berlin. 21 January 1945, elements of the British 15th Corps execute the first of 2 planned amphibious landings on Romrey Island in the Bay of Bengal. The scene is eerily reminiscent of a landing 2 weeks earlier on the island of Akyab, 100 miles to the north along Burma's Arakan coast. As before, the mostly West Indian troops come ashore to find the island apparently abandoned by its Japanese defenders. The landings at Akyab on 4 January were the 3rd attempt by the British to take the island and its strategically valuable airfields. After being repelled by withering Japanese defense on 2 previous occasions, the Allies landed this time to find the Emperor's Burma Area Army already had evacuated its divisions from the island to reinforce its defenses in central Burma. This turn of events, first at Akyab, now on Romrey, reflects just how much and how quickly the balance of power has shifted in the China-Burma-India theater of operations. The Romrey landing, commanded by Major General C.E.N. Lomax, is preceded by heavy naval and air bombardments, under which the enemy simply retreats to the island's interior. The Japanese still have at least 1 full division on Romrey, but Lieutenant General Seiso Sakuri elects to make his stand further inland, perhaps hoping to tie up the Brits on the island for weeks, rather than spend his dwindling resources in a futile attempt to prevent their landing. The main focus of the Allies' Burma campaign has always been in the north. In fact, if the main lines of supply and communication between India and the Allied forces in China did not pass through northern Burma, the Allies might not be in this country at all. Since the old Burma Road was closed by the Japanese in 1941, supplies for Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese National Army, as well as for the Flying Tigers of General Claire Chennault, have been flown over the Himalayas along a difficult route known as the Hump. So the Allies spent much of 1944 on military operations designed to drive the Japanese from the Huguan Valley and enable construction of a new land route into China from Lido. The occupation of Michino, with its network of airfields, made it possible to open a shorter and less dangerous air route than the Hump, but completion of the Lido Road remained a priority. In October, American Lieutenant General Daniel Sultan, commanding a fighting force that included American, British, and Chinese divisions, struck out south for Bhamo, which he took on 15 December. That same week, the British 14th Army, led by Lieutenant General William Uncle Bill Slim, established bridgeheads across the Chinwin River in central Burma. For both forces, and for General Lomax in the south, the next step was the annihilation of the Burma Area Army. As Slim's army pushes toward Mandalay, British troops are hard at work preparing the airfields on Akyab to provide air support for his final assault. Meanwhile, the British West Indian troops on Romrey move steadily toward the island's interior, hoping to drive the Japanese off the lee shore and back to the Burmese mainland. On 22 January, the British tighten the noose by attacking the mainland city of Myeongpong. opposite Ramri, thereby cutting off Japanese coastal garrisons stationed there. This sets the stage for the bloodiest fighting of the Burma campaign since the Allied victory at Kohima. Meanwhile, Sultan's forces have pushed the enemy away from the vital Lido-Burma road intersection. Once the roads have been secured to the south, the Allies will be able to move supplies at will. The principal goals of Allied operations here included drawing off Japanese troops from the larger war in the Pacific and maintaining air bases in China for the eventual purpose of attacking the Emperor's home islands. But the capture of airfields in the Marianas in July 1944 has rendered the Chinese bases superfluous. And with the capture of Rangoon and Mandalay imminent, the clock is ticking, and time may be about up for CBI.